Welcome back to this introduction to philosophy. We're going to be moving on to Aristotle now. And before you watch this video, please turn to your Allen textbook and read at least categories on the soul and Nicomachean ethics. These have already been um, condensed for you, so you're not reading the whole book, but you're just reading some selections. So just keep in mind these are edited selections. Uh, for those of you who might be wanting to write your paper on Aristotle, it might benefit you to, just go back and read the entire book. So Aristotle was one of Plato's students. He was Alexander the Great's tutor. So depending on what you think about Alexander the Great, he either did a great job or a really terrible job. Um, uh, Aristotle's father was a physician to Philip of Macedonia, who was Alexander's father. Aristotle went on to found a school in Athens called the Lyceum, which went on for hundreds of years. He made contributions to an amazing number of fields, the disciplines that today we would know as literary theory. Perhaps you have read Aristotle's interpretation of Greek tragedy, which is still read today. His political theory. He is one of the inventors of biology, the discipline of biology. He had observed hundreds of different plant and animal species. He came up with a binomial classification system for plants and animals that later became the basis for Linnaeus's classification system. He had his own physics, astronomy, ethics, metaphysics, and logic. His classical logic was the standard in logic until the modern period. So it's really amazing what he was able to achieve during his lifetime. Today we're going to be spending some time on the ethics. He wrote two ethics. One was called the Eudemian ethics, and the other one was called the Nicomachean ethics. They were named after their editors. So one of the editors was Nicomachus, and it's the Nicomachean ethics that is usually read. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We saw that Plato had his tripartite soul. Aristotle also had a tripartite soul. This comes from his book On the Soul. That book, if you read it, contains a lot of references to the pre-Socratics. And that's where many of our quotations from the pre-Socratics come from. For Aristotle, soul was not confined to human beings, but covered all living things. So starting from the bottom, there's the nutritive soul, which is responsible for growth and reproduction. All plants and animals have this type of soul. Moving up a little bit, all things are alive, but animals can move around and perceive things. Moving up a little bit further is practical wisdom, the knowledge of how to secure the ends of life, the knowledge of how to make a living, basically. And according to Aristotle, all animals have practical wisdom. So a bear knows that when it's going to hibernate, it needs to find a cave, a cave or underneath a root ball of a tree or something like that where it can hibernate. Rabbits go down into their holes. So every animal knows how to shelter itself. Every animal knows how to find food. Every animal, at least mammals, try to protect their young and so forth. And then, so really the only kind of the only kind of rationality that's unique to human beings is contemplation. For Aristotle, this means specifically contemplation of the eternal. Okay, that we found the exact same thing in Plato, right? So they both said that the purpose of human life is contemplation of the eternal. Okay, so oftentimes there'll be a big deal made about the sort of split between Plato and Aristotle. It's true they differ in some respects, but in other respects, well, in this respect, they agree that the purpose of human life is to contemplate the eternal things. Aristotle is known for his 4 kinds of causation. Let's take a look at those. This is what the first type of cause is the type of cause that we normally think about when we think about causation. And that is the physical force that goes into making something. And we're going to use a sculptor as the example throughout. So when the sculptor takes the chisel and hammers at it, hammers at the stone, that is motive cause or efficient cause. Next, a material cause, the stuff that goes into making something. So the actual stone that comes from the quarry that the sculptor uses. Moving on, the formal cause, the shape and characteristics of something, its smoothness, its hardness, its shape, and so forth. And finally, the final cause, the end or goal towards which the process of making something advances. So the sculptor has in his mind this sculpture of Zeus. He has the idea of Zeus in his head, and he tries to make the formal cause align with the final cause to make that sculpture. So Aristotle's philosophy is known as teleological in nature, which comes from the Greek word telos, which means end or goal. So throughout his philosophy, he's going to ask, what is the goal towards which this thing is moving? And that includes natural productions and products of human ingenuity as well. So we're going to see why that's important when we get to the ethics. All right, so speaking of the ethics, Book 1, Chapter 1, if you get that out. Every art and every investigation, and likewise every practical pursuit or undertaking seems to aim at some good. Hence it has been well said that the good is that at which all things aim. And skipping on down, the end of science the science of medicine is health, the art of shipbuilding a vessel, that of strategy victory, that of domestic economy wealth. Okay, so we have all different human arts and sciences, strategy, economics, shipbuilding, bridle making, and so forth. All of these human arts aim at some good. Okay, and as we're going to see, there are these lesser goods, but they all of these lesser goods are directed towards a higher good, and the higher good, as it turns out, is happiness. So you could draw for yourself a diagram of a triangle. The bottom of the triangle, you could put all these different human arts. Above these human arts, there is one art that coordinates the other arts and sciences. Does anybody know what that art is, perchance? I'm going to pretend that I'm listening to you. It's politics. So politics is the capstone above the other arts and sciences that leads these other arts and sciences towards the overarching end or goal, which is happiness. So all of these other arts and sciences aim at the common good of happiness. Okay. Now, the way to get to happiness, as it turns out, the sides of the triangle are virtue. By living a virtuous life, we can get to happiness. All right, so what is ethics then? Ethics is derived from the Greek word ethike, which comes from ethos, which means habit. So ethics is habit, and habit is ethics. So he says in the second chapter, it makes no small difference whether we form habits of one kind or another from our very youth. It makes a very great difference, or rather, all the difference. So the goal of human life, which is happiness, results from a virtuous activity of soul, a virtuous activity of soul. Now, sometimes, well, that's great, Aristotle, but I need to know what virtue is. Sometimes when you'll be reading the Nicomachean Ethics, um, Aristotle will say, well, what is virtue? Virtue is whatever a virtuous person does. Well, that's not very helpful, is it? Or at other places, he'll say, uh, virtue is doing the right thing at the right time with the right motivation towards the right person with the right intuition, with the right intention, and so forth. Well, maybe that's a little bit better, but it still doesn't quite get at what virtue is. Um, so you could really read the book as trying to figure out what virtue is. Now, in the earlier chapters, he goes through some possible candidates for what makes people happiness, what makes people happy. He talks about money, for example. Well, what if money is what makes you happy? And he says that, well, the trouble with money is that you're never really sure when you have enough. You could have a whole pile of money, but you're still going to want some more. The same thing with fame. How do you know when you're famous enough, right? There's no clear stopping point. The other problem with money and fame is that he's looking for a definition of a final self and self-sufficient end for humanity as a whole, right? So uh, by definition, everyone can't be famous, right? Because if everyone were famous, then no one would be famous. So that can't be an end or a goal for humanity in general. Now he's not actually naive about money. He says that you need a certain amount of money in order to live and be happy. You need to be able to buy food. Probably need some medical care and things like that. Um, so he's not naive about money. He says you do need a modicum of material resources. Remember, we talked about practical wisdom already. Uh, but the trouble with money is there's no clear stopping point, and the desire for money can be insatiable. So that's why he settles on virtue, right? But we still need to know what virtue is. And that's where we come to what's called the doctrine of the mean, or the golden mean. The golden mean is a moderate way of life that avoids extreme states of character. A moderate way of life that avoids extreme states of character. It's called the golden mean. Maybe it should be called the golden median, though, as we're going to see. Um, Now, the virtues that are most important to Aristotle are sort of typical Greek virtues. Temperance. Where have we seen that before? Oh yeah, we saw that in the Republic, right? Courage. Hey, we saw that in the Republic as well, right? Pride. Pride is a Greek virtue. In Christianity, pride is a sin, but the Greeks considered it to be very important, right? And liberality. So we'll go through, liberality is a virtue concerned with money. It means, being able to give of your money when necessary. So temperance, neither drinking too much nor drinking too little. Neither eating too much nor eating too little. Courage, you don't want to have too much courage. Otherwise, you might decide to play chicken on the interstate. That would be something like being brash or being cocky or something like that. You also don't want to have too little courage. What do we call it when you have too little courage? Cowardice, right? Which would have been a major Greek I don't know if I want to use the word sin, but it would be a major character flaw. Pride, if you have too much pride, again, you're kind of cocky or egotistical. If you have too little pride, well, you could become a doormat, you could become a pushover, and we wouldn't want that either. Liberality means being able to give when necessary to a worthy cause, but you wouldn't want to give too much. He calls that prodigality, right? Just throwing your money away, or on the opposite end, being stingy. You want to be right in the middle. There's another virtue concerned with money that is strictly for rich people, and it's called magnificence. Only rich people can be magnificent, and magnificence is determined according to taste. So magnificence is giving tastefully. So the reason why we have rich people is so that they can give money to, say, establish a cancer wing on a hospital or eradicate some terrible disease, right? So the magnificent person gives generously and tastefully. So an example of poor taste would be like having, gold faucets in the bathroom because it's tacky and it doesn't serve any useful purpose. Okay. So just as there's a median with respect to these virtues, there's also a median between pleasure and pain. All moral activity involves some pleasure and some pain. So think about an Olympic athlete. An Olympic athlete is going to have to endure some pain, the pain of training. An Olympic swimmer has to go to the pool every day and swim, which is difficult and painful, sometimes involving, physical injury. But the Olympic athlete is willing to put in that work because the rewards will be worthwhile, right? And same thing with going through school, right? You have to go through the pain of studying, the pain of doing your work, the pain of coming to class, with the idea that that pain is eventually going to pay off. Pleasure, of the two, pleasure is more seductive. And pleasure, we tend to err towards pleasure. But if we don't resist that tendency to err towards pleasure, then we get ourselves into trouble. So of the two, we have to sort of overcorrect by steering towards pain and enduring the pain of virtue. So maybe you could just pause the video right now and think of a time when you had to commit some moral act. And maybe it was painful, but you still felt like you needed to do it. So go ahead and pause the video now and think of a time when you had to do something that was painful, but nonetheless moral. Okay, so hopefully you were able to think of something. I know students in the past have said, well, one of my colleagues at work was stealing money out of the cash register, and I had to report that person. And that was painful, but I nonetheless felt that it was the right thing to do. Or maybe you've seen an instance of bullying or something like that, and you confront the bully. Obviously, that's not exactly what you want to do for your own sake, but in order to stand up for someone else, it might be necessary to do that. So probably you came up with your own examples. Okay, we can give some possible critiques. Like I said, it could be too vague, right? Oh, just be virtuous. It sort of depends on already understanding the nature of virtue, and probably Aristotle has in mind some specific ancient Greek notions of virtue. So he might be thinking about the heroes from the Greek epics, like Achilles, right? So they had a shared sort of cultural understanding of virtue, and perhaps he's depending on that shared cultural understanding, or maybe he has some hero figures in mind, but he doesn't always let us in on who those moral exemplars would be. So we might need to come up with moral exemplars of our own if we're going to make this work. It's also inherently conservative. Moderation only works in a society that's already just, right? So one can imagine, I think an introduction to one of the versions of Nicomachean Ethics used the example of a Nazi soldier, right? We can imagine a Nazi officer who would satisfy all of Aristotle's virtues, and yet we wouldn't consider to be a moral person because that person is living in a corrupt regime in a bad society, right? So if you have a bad society, it's hard to have good individuals in a bad society. It's also pretty individualistic. It's based on personal virtue, right? But again, what about societies? What about institutions and their values? And I think that's it for Aristotle, and we're actually done with the unit on Greek philosophy. If you keep following along with these videos, we're going to be moving to Indian philosophy next. So thanks for watching.